Hey everybody, and welcome to another edition of RetroRevival. Today we're not just talking about one game. Today we're having a look back and a look ahead of what is now one of my favourite consoles of all time, the Nintendo Switch. We're going to revisit a lot of the great aspects of the Switch, and some of the stuff that could be improved going forward into the next one. I also want to point out that this is my own personal experience, so you might not hear all the games that you've played be mentioned in this video. But if there is a game that you absolutely loved on the Switch, be sure to share it in the comment section below. So, with that in mind, let's get to it. If you were a fan of Nintendo back around 2015 to 2016, the Nintendo Switch rumours were running wild, with prototypes, concepts, and everything in between being spread around the internet. You remember this patent where the controller was literally the screen? Really glad that didn't happen. It had a sleek codename with the Nintendo NX, and all in all, the games community was incredibly hyped for what was to come. Every other week, websites like IGN, GameSpot, Eurogamer and more would have articles up about the latest rumours, patent, leak and insider info. Nintendo joining its home console and handheld platforms together was a crazy thought, because not only were we going to see the big home console versions of games like Zelda on the platform, we're also going to see the handheld stuff like Pokemon make its way over too. Combine that with the ability to take it with you like a regular handheld, and still be able to play all those games was really exciting. The reveal couldn't have come quick enough. Jump forward to October 20th, 2016, and Nintendo drops the reveal trailer for Nintendo Switch, and in that trailer it reveals that the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was coming to the system, along with the 31st port of Skyrim. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, NBA 2K, Splatoon 2 and a new Mario game, which would go on to become Mario Odyssey, were all shown off in the trailer. The trailer did a great job showcasing the versatility of the console. You could chill on the couch with your bloody horse of a dog playing it, pop the Joy-Cons on and play it handheld on flights or road trips. Nintendo were also very optimistic about people interacting in public. I feel like if most of us tried what this lad just did, we'd be getting a swift uppercut to the chin and a post on Twitter. She doesn't want you, Chad. Let her play the Switch in peace. Also, what would have made this trailer 10 times better is if this woman just looked out the window at her mates yelling at her to come over, just closed the curtains and sat back down. The Switch set a release date of March 2017. And we went on to get a Nintendo event showcasing the launch titles and beyond at the start of that year. We got confirmations of all the previous titles mentioned, along with stuff like ARMS, Xenoblade Chronicles, Shin Megami Tensei, Fire Emblem, Dragon Quest and Octopath Traveler. They also announced the brilliant news of the console being region-free, which means you could import physical games from other countries. Which is great if a game you love was only available to buy physically in another country. I've actually gone on to order a bunch of different games over the years from stuff like PlayAsia, and even a few of my friends have gifted me games as well from America and Japan. So yeah, looking at all that, it was all looking really positive leading into the launch. The Switch went on to release on March 3rd, and I managed to get my model pre-ordered in my local GameStop. May it rest in peace. And I was there on release day to pick it up along with my copy of Zelda and my carry case. To say Breath of the Wild was one of the best gaming experiences I've ever had is an understatement. Everything felt like a discovery. I was taking my time, and despite the map being filled with shrines and towers, I didn't feel like I had to clear areas. My map wasn't littered with stuff to tick off, and I was always excited to find a new shrine. It didn't give me the same checklist feel as a lot of more routine stuff in open world games. The shrines were genuinely really enjoyable to do, and always offered a fun and unique challenge. It was up to me to explore and discover not only the gameplay objectives like shrines and towers and quests, but also the lore of the world, both in world design and in journals and notes around the map. I've had severe open world game fatigue over the past few years, and I often struggle through some games because I want to experience the story, but Zelda was one where that wasn't an issue. By the end of my time in Hyrule, I had well over 200 hours in the game, and I loved every minute of it. I still remember figuring out the timing of the parry and it being an absolute game changer, or that you could surf down mountains on your shield, or that metal was actually dangerous to have on you when there was lightning. Breath of the Wild made Hyrule feel like home, and I often missed the world when I finished the game and when I finished playing it. I wanted more story, I wanted a post-game. I didn't want it to be over. And I feel like that's one of the biggest compliments you can pay a game. When it's so good, you never want it to end. I've gone on to get amiibos, books, and statues from the game. It's genuinely one of my favourite games of all time.
Super Mario Odyssey!
As the year went on, I played stuff like Shovel Knight, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Mario vs. Rabbids Kingdom Battle, which had no right to be as good as it was. I also played Wonder Boy and the Dragon's Trap, thank you Happy Console Gamer for that recommendation, Stardew Valley, and Super Mario Odyssey. Mario Odyssey was an absolute joy to play, and a bloody challenging one at times too. I still haven't done all the post-game stuff if I'm being honest, so it's something I definitely want to revisit when my backlog is reduced, because yikes. I really loved Odyssey. It was such a fun experience, and really reinforced my decision to pick up the Switch. Everything from the costumes to the level designs were so fun. I do still wish they had Donkey Kong show up in New Donk City, but I won't hold that against them. Each world in the game had its own unique charm and characters, along with different gameplay challenges with the mini-games in each stage. During Nintendo's first E3 Direct for Nintendo Switch, we got the announcement of Metroid Prime 4, which we will come back to at the end of this video. As the years went on, we got one of my favourite Switch games, with Platinum Games' Astral Chain. If you haven't played this one yet, please do. It's fantastic. I love it so much. You play as a detective in a police department, and you wield these things called legions to fight creatures from another world. It's kind of cyberpunky, it's post-apocalyptic, and it's very anime. I really recommend this game. It's a lot of fun. It's a great example of the Switch being pushed to the max and showcasing how good games can look and play on the system when the developers are actually able to focus on the system and optimization. We got The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, which was an amazing remake of a Game Boy classic. I was actually about to start playing the original for the first time when this was announced, and I ended up holding off for the remake instead. We also seen Super Smash Bros. Ultimate light the Nintendo community on fire with the new reveals for different fighters every other month. It became a massive thing for Nintendo Directs for a new Smash character to be announced, and even for someone like myself who wasn't really into Smash, it was so fun every Direct where one of these characters would show up, especially when it ended up being someone like Banjo. Luigi's Mansion 3 was a super fun time, and another incredible display of how good games could look on the console. We've also gotten Metroid Dread and Prime Remastered, Splatoon and Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Kirby and the Forgotten Lands, along with basically all of the Wii U first-party titles, excluding the likes of Wind Waker, Twilight Princess HD, and Xenoblade Chronicles X. I'm really hoping we'll finally see them get brought to the Switch, or at least its successor, over the next year. Wind Waker and Twilight Princess on Switch has been my most consistent request for the console, and Xenoblade Chronicles X, I know people do want that as well. I'd love to see them all release on the normal Switch, with just support for the Switch 2, because that means everyone gets to play it. Nintendo really started whipping out all of its home console and handheld franchises with titles like the recently announced Mario and Luigi Brothership, and of course Pokemon all making their way over to the console. And speaking of Pokemon, let's just stick with that for a bit, because where the likes of Mario and Zelda have thrived on the Switch, the journey of one of Nintendo's most important franchises of all time has been a frustrating one on the Switch, to say the least. Pokemon has been the king of the Nintendo handheld, and to be fair, it still is. These games still make absolute bank, but unfortunately the adventure of Pokemon on the Switch has not been all smooth sailing. The Game Boy all the way to the 3DS was banger after banger after banger. By the time it hit the Sun and Moon games, it was kinda clear Game Freak were ready for new hardware. They had pushed the 3DS as far as they could. Sun and Moon looked fantastic on 3DS, but obviously they were held back by the hardware. If you've seen the games running on higher resolution, you know how good those games actually could look. Which is why for a long time it was suspected the rumoured third version of the game, called Pokemon Stars, would release as an upgraded Platinum and Emerald style version of the games for Switch. But it never happened. Instead we got Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Pokemon Let's Go Eevee. These were remakes of Gen 1, where much like in Yellow you had one starter option, but this time it could be either Eevee or Pikachu depending on which one you bought. These were genuinely great remakes of Gen 1, but there was an issue. There was no traditional wild Pokemon battles, and it was trying to bring in the Pokemon Go fans with motion controls. I still to this day think this is the best looking Pokemon game on Switch. I actually think it's my ideal art style for the series if they make more traditional games in the future. It even features Pokemon walking around the overworld. I feel like if they released an update adding traditional wild Pokemon battles to the game, this game would take on a whole new lease of life. Game Freak catch a lot of flack, they really do, but these guys have had to pump out these games every other year for years, and moving to a bigger platform with bigger expectations and player demands, and also with a much wider margin for error as games get more and more ambitious, the cracks were going to eventually show. Next came Sword and Shield. Overall, really fun games with a fun but light story, but this was the first attempt at an open world-esque Pokemon game, and it did kinda show. The world of Galar was pretty cool, and weirdly enough, I think this game shined when it was linear, because the world looked really pretty. I loved like those pathways where you're walking down the hill and you can see the towns and stuff in the distance. I always loved how that looked, and even in those sections, the Pokemon were still roaming around the world. It was when you went into the wild area, that's when things started to chug, and things started to go a bit sour, because the main thing is as soon as you connected to the internet, the game chugged a lot in that area. So if you are playing the game and you're playing solo, don't connect to the internet unless you need to. It'll run much better for you. You could tell Game Freak wanted to do more here, and had really cool ideas, especially seeing the ghosts basically of other players playing the game, and having wild Pokemon roaming around the fields, and raids too. But those issues meant that those players you were seeing, it basically looked like someone was losing connection in COD on the 360. And then the Pokemon at times would spawn in like just a massive bundle, like a bunch of spiders. Sometimes it was like nightmare fuel when you seen just a big horde of Pokemon in like a 1 meter block span. However, I feel like the DLCs, especially the Snow Tundra one, improved on a lot of these complaints. Next up we had the Gen 4 remix and Pokemon Legends Arceus, and to be honest, I really liked both of these games. The biggest fault of the Gen 4 remix was just the lack of expanded content from Platinum, like we've seen in previous remakes. Implementing them like how Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire did with Emerald's content would have been a cool way to expand the games a bit. The other topic of debate was the art style. Now, would I have preferred the Let's Go art style? Yes, 100%, but I'm still okay with what they went with. It felt like a hybrid of the original games and Link's Awakening. Legends Arceus was cool as hell, I loved it. It did struggle with performance, but it was still great. The Pokemon spawning felt so much more natural than Sword and Shield. And the fact that you could actually catch Pokemon in the wild like we've seen in the anime for the past 20 years was so fun. The story and characters were actually quite cool and interesting, and I still to this day wish this game had another year in the oven just to polish it off a bit more. If they released the Gen 4 remakes and then this a year later rather than a few months later, I would have been absolutely fine with it. I do feel like the Legends formula is the way to go in the future for open world Pokemon games. It just worked much better. Because when Scarlet and Violet came out, we saw what a full open world Pokemon game would be like, and to be honest, I don't want one anymore. I can't comment much on Scarlet and Violet because honestly I traded mine in while I could still get most of my money back. I really tried, but I just could not enjoy the games at all. The performance was a massive thing for me, mainly the frame rate. I just found it actually kind of severe on my eyes, weirdly enough. And the gameplay itself felt like a massive step back from Legends in a lot of ways, especially exploration and catching Pokemon. Removing catching Pokemon, like in Legends, was a very odd choice to me. If it was a return to the more traditional games, I would have understood, but the fact that it was like another open world game but they got rid of one of the coolest aspects of that one was just bizarre. The lack of level scaling was also a bummer. It would have added a ton of replayability and actually made it feel a bit like the anime, if depending on how many badges you had would determine the party and levels of the next gym you challenged. It was incredibly ambitious, and I do feel bad for Game Freak because they were clearly trying to satisfy the Pokemon Breath of the Wild demands, but it ended up being the lowest rated mainline Pokemon game in the franchise. I think the reaction to this game was the kick the Pokemon company needed to finally give Game Freak two very big things: time and resources. And I truly hope with this extra time, Game Freak will remind us that they made some of our favourite games growing up. The Switch suffered in this growing pains period, and I don't think this generation managed to get its masterpiece of a game like previous handhelds had, but I really hope the next generation will see Pokemon return to form as one of Nintendo's best franchises. Because there is no Pokemon fatigue, Pokemon is still killing it. It's just simply bad game fatigue. The success of Pal World is a great example of this, along with other examples like Cassette Beasts, Temtem and Nexomon. I want Game Freak to succeed, and I want them to have as much time and support to do so. If they need a support studio, give it to them. If they need an extra few months, give them that too. Those folks made a lot of our childhoods fun as hell, so I'm really rooting for them. Animal Crossing New Horizon is probably one of the most important games on the Switch. I absolutely loved it, but I know it's divisive depending on your experience. I'm aware a lot of longtime fans were disappointed by missing features and content that never made it into the game, but for newcomers like myself, it was a fantastic experience, and a bloody well needed one at that too. New Horizons released during lockdown when we all needed something to keep us from going off the deep end. I remember it becoming part of my daily routine. I'd wake up in the morning, make a cup of tea or coffee, have my breakfast, and I'd spend about an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, strolling around my island, picking up weeds and building new things. And to say this game moved Switches off shelves is an understatement. I'm really looking forward to what they have planned for the next game, because I feel like it's going to be an even bigger success. Switch Online has evolved a lot since its inception. Originally it was free for the first few months, then it was a €20 a year subscription. It included online play and voice chat through the Nintendo Switch app. It also included discounts and free trials of different games. We then got a more expensive version of the subscription that added new features like giving subscribers the Mario Kart and Animal Crossing DLCs, but Nintendo also added stuff like classic title libraries, starting with the NES and eventually Super Nintendo, all the Game Boys, Mega Drive, and N64. These games featured stuff like save states, rewind options, and in some games, online play. I made great use of this playing through the original Zelda and Link to the Past for the first time. I'm hoping with the Switch 2, or whatever it ends up being called, Super Nintendo Switch is right there, I'm just saying, that if they decide to carry the system across, they'll update a lot of it. Dedicated servers for Nintendo's games are badly needed, online voice chat on the console and not on our phones, or even just do what PlayStation and Xbox are doing and add Discord support. Classic games being available to purchase and download through Virtual Console. They could even release physical collections of each console too. Look at what Capcom's doing right now with Marvel vs. Capcom and the Mega Man collections. Do stuff like NES Collection Volume 1 or just a straight up Zelda collection featuring all the 2D games. Just so they're not exclusively tied to a subscription service. It'd be a great new way to sell the games, but it'd also be really good for game preservation. Then we get to the eShop, and remember when I mentioned online has evolved a lot? The eShop really needs to evolve more, because I feel like it's a needle in a haystack situation. The eShop needs to add a section like DSiWare or PSP Minis, not a section for indie games, just a section where all the shovelware goes, away from the normal releases, or at least become much stricter on the content that's allowed on the eShop. So when you go looking for the latest AAA game, or you want to discover a new indie game, it's not buried underneath all this mess. Browsing the eShop doesn't feel like a quality experience currently. It's like you're on the dodgy end of the Google Play Store, where all the games that are trying to bleed your wallet dry. It feels cheap, and it shouldn't. We shouldn't have to go out of our way to root through shovelware to find good games. Either regulate it way more, or separate the low quality stuff from proper games. Because also, as family friendly as Nintendo is, there's a lot of really sus looking stuff as soon as you open the eShop, and I don't think it's a look Nintendo want to represent them. The reveal of this game genuinely broke me. We were actually returning to Breath of the Wild's Hyrule. It was everything I wanted. It was the post-game of Breath of the Wild we never got. And wow, did it turn out to be even more than we expected. Tears of the Kingdom is nothing short of a masterpiece in my opinion. Incredibly, despite being the sequel to Breath of the Wild, using basically the same map, it feels incredibly unique. Where Breath of the Wild left the story for you to discover and remember, Tears of the Kingdom took a more traditional approach. Where Breath of the Wild was a Hyrule in ruin, Tears of the Kingdom was a Hyrule being reborn and rediscovered. The Sky Islands added a whole new level of exploration to the game, along with the underworld they added too. The building mechanics changed how we navigated the world, solved puzzles, and dealt with enemies. As did all the new abilities. Being able to warp through ceilings completely added a new level of navigation. They made the whole world and experience feel fresh again. You didn't have that moment of leaving the Shrine of Resurrection for the first time. You instead see a completely different perspective of Hyrule as you freefall from the Sky Islands. It does seem like it's the last time we'll explore this version of Hyrule, but after Tears of the Kingdom, I'm okay with that. I'm ready for the next era of Zelda. It definitely has a lot to live up to. Now we jump into the present and the future, because we're in 2024 and this is it. This is the final few months. A few months back, Nintendo did an absolute monster of a direct. They revealed a new Mario and Luigi game, a traditional Zelda game in the style of Link's Awakening, where you finally get to play as Zelda herself, which I'm actually currently playing and it's fantastic so far. I'll hopefully get around to talking about that someday. And finally, after 7 years, we got our first look at Metroid Prime 4 and it looks great too. I do feel like this is going to be the Breath of the Wild for the next generation. And what I mean by that is, we've just gotten that 2025 release date, and I think just like Breath of the Wild, the game is going to be released on both Switch and its successor simultaneously. And if this is Switch gameplay we're looking at, the next gen version is going to look incredible. There were reports last year of Breath of the Wild being showcased on new hardware, and when the new Paper Mario game came out, it was data mined and it revealed it had 4K support, which the Switch obviously does not support. So that could imply Nintendo are planning to update old games and release new games with 4K support when the system does drop. A new Zelda, Mario, and Metroid in the last year of the Switch is a hell of a way to go out, along with remasters of Donkey Kong and Luigi's Mansion, and with third-party games we've got coming out like Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake, and we've had the return of Marvel vs. Capcom with the collection. Switch is getting a really nice and well-deserved send-off. Nintendo didn't compete this generation with insane graphics and sheer hardware power. Instead, they focused on gameplay, replayability, and fun. Graphically, with some games, the technical limitations of the Switch have been made clear. Some people have really struggled with the system. But Nintendo themselves, and some other companies as well, have had games on Switch that didn't look like they should have ran on the Switch. To the point where when games like Tears of the Kingdom and now Prime 4 are coming out, there's always the topic of discussion of, is this actually running on Switch? Luigi's Mansion 3, for example, was a smaller scope game with smaller environments, but it looked incredible. So Nintendo getting to work with hardware maybe on par or beyond the Steam Deck is incredibly exciting, considering what they've already accomplished on much weaker hardware. The Switch has had a hell of a run. There's been a lot of ups, there's been a few downs like I've mentioned, but this console is definitely up there as one of my favourite systems ever. So whatever Nintendo is cooking next, it has a hell of a lot to live up to, and I really hope it does. And that does it for another edition of RetroRevival. Please let me know what you thought in the comment section below, and also let me know what is your favourite game of the Switch generation. Thanks so much for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next one.